So Provost Moransky, I was just saying earlier that this group is normally not a quiet group, but I think that they were just trying to impress Stacy.
There you go. Well, that is important. So
No, well, but Jamie felt slighted, so I'm just going to say that they're being quiet because of Jamie.
okay.
Oh, because I was going to say Provost Moransky impressed me just this morning.
Oh, that.
Yeah. I was like, wow.
I know.
She's a provost.
We will do it in honor of both. How's that?
Okay, that sounds good to me. I just want to know who's buying the drinks afterwards.
Oh, yeah.
Well, apparently that's me.
Okay, exactly.
That's
well,
Mel.
Rachel,
everybody's impressed by Mel.
Oh,
there you go.
Well, exactly. Oh, hey, Mel. I'm sorry, President Kadar. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
That's good to see you. Okay, so Rachel.
Yes.
Let's go ahead and get it working.
Okay, we'll get started. All right, so welcome to our 18th Fireside Check-In. I'm sure you would all agree with me by saying that this is like surreal to think that it's been nearly a full year that we've been doing this. We originally planned on holding these gatherings for 90 days or until we all got back on campus, which we figured was going to be before that 90-day window. And here we sit, still under shelter, although doing better now in the red. But I, for one, I'm grateful that we have found this space and that we do get together, and we will continue doing this as long as we need to. And I'm not going to put an end date on it anymore. We're just going to wing it.
Right.
So today we're here to celebrate Women's History Month. And many of you might not know the history of how it all started, which I think is very cool. The actual celebration of Women's History Month grew out of a week-long celebration of women's contributions to culture, history, and society organized by the school district of Santa Rosa. So, and that was in 1978. And I just think that's very cool. Presentations were given at dozens of schools. Hundreds of students participated in a Real Woman essay contest, and a parade was held in downtown Santa Rosa. And then a few years later, the idea had caught on within communities and school districts and organizations across the country. In 1980, President Jimmy Carter issued the first presidential proclamation declaring the week of March 8th as National Women's History Week. And then the US Congress followed suit the next year, passing a resolution establishing a national celebration. 6 years later, the National Women's History Project successfully petitioned Congress to expand the event to the entire month of March. Just like anything that deserves to be properly honored and celebrated, it took some time to reach the recognition it deserved. And with that theme in mind of determination, grit, and perseverance, we will be celebrated today. We are being celebrated today with our honored guest and speaker, Dr. Llande Ajose. Thank you for joining us. But before that, we would like to honor another woman who is also making history. And so I'll pass the mic to Doc.
Well, thank you, Rachel, and always very informative. I had no idea that it began at Santa Rosa, so what a piece of history in our own backyard. One of the things that I started to do over 30 years ago in my career was that anytime that a person was working on a doctoral degree and they finished it within that time period that we were together, I purchased a pen in their honor and welcomed them to the circle of scholars with any individuals that happened to be in the department. At the time that I started this, I was a dean of students at the University of North Texas, and we had a very large doctoral program there. And so it was nice to have within the department at least a number of people that could welcome them into the group. over the last 30 years, this has grown tremendously. And some of you will laugh at this, and I am sure that our newest doctor may not laugh at as much. When I first did this process, I gave away a Mont Blanc pen. You can't, yeah, I see you laughing, Audra. So I could not afford to do that. We have already 10 people that are set up in our division that are currently in the process of getting a doctoral degree. I have one right now that just passed, Jamie, congratulations, just passed his proposal defense yesterday. And Mont Blancs have gone up about 300%. So with that in mind, we'll just move on. But the idea is still the same after 30 years. And now I have awarded over 48 pens. And today will be number 49. And so the 48th pen was our own Dr. Gerald Jones, who received his degree right after I arrived at Sonoma State. And I felt that because he worked with me and because we worked under the same roof of doing that work, that he fit, that he met that qualification. And so we had our very first Circle of Scholars ceremony. And I think a number of you may have been at that when we called everyone to the front of the room at the Grand Ballroom and had folks welcoming Dr. Jones to the Circle of Scholars. And so today I am so honored and pleased that we have one of the hardest working individuals that I know, a brilliant scholar and just an incredible human being, to join us on the day that we are also celebrating women and the history of our country. And so at this point, I would ask all individuals that have their doctoral degree, if you'll please raise your hand in the computer. So if you'll just raise your hand for us. And if you don't have it, yes, if you don't have it, please raise your hand. if you don't have the function, thank you. I want people to be able to see the number of scholars that we currently have with us, but I also want to make sure too that we do something else. Since we are not able to actually formally welcome Dr. Audra Grady-Verrier to the Circle of Scholars, I've asked all of you to recognize, and so folks can see that you're here. We've also done one other thing, Audra, that's a little bit different, but I'm also going to ask everyone, as we welcome you, Audra, to the Circle of Scholars, will all of you that have your welcome note, if you'll please raise your welcome note so she can see it.
That's so cool.
I'm going to take a picture. And Audra, at this point, what we would normally do is I would simply say, welcome to you. Welcome to, you can now put them down and you can lower your hands to everyone. Thank you so very much. But Audra, I would also like to say that we're so proud to have you now as part of our scholarly team. And hopefully you will be the next person that helps me to welcome others into the fold. It's really neat when you can think about in the Division of Student Affairs, we only have around 100 people. We already have 15 that have terminal degrees and we have 10 in the chute. So that's really telling you that we may be in the nation, one of the most scholarly student affairs divisions. And thank you to you and your wonderful dissertation. That was absolutely incredible. I know that you did it without revision. Many of us cannot say that, but I will say that congratulations to you for doing that. I did get a chance to hear you present your dissertation twice, and it was absolutely amazing. And both times you made people cry. So that shows the heart that went into the research, along with the incredible research that you are bringing now, and to the knowledge for all of us that we have. I always say we're adding to the cog of the research. And so thank you so much for doing so. And I'm going to ask one other question before I turn it over to you. And that is that I would also like to ask all those individuals that are now currently in a doctoral program, if you'll raise your hands. Those who are in and those who have recently applied. I'm looking at the different screens, but I know that there are several from our division. If they're not here today, as I said, we have at least 10 people. So congratulations to all of them. So the brand new Dr. Grady Verrier, what would you give to our brand new folks that are joining and going through the research?
Well, first I want to say thank you for my beautiful pen box and pen. Here it is, everyone. So if you are in a program, you too can have a pen that you have to Google to figure out how to refill, because that's what I had to do this morning. I've never
I'm going to call you and tell you how to do it.
So now I have learned, and you too will have to do that. So, it was interesting, Doc, because you asked me to talk about what I had overcome in this journey. And I've spent a lot of time reflecting on that, because my work, for those of you who haven't heard it or read it, was about the journey of women leaders in higher education, overcoming bias and adversity. And there's truly still an uphill climb for women, women of all backgrounds, to make it to this level, to have a doctoral degree, to be in higher education in senior level leadership positions. And even in those positions, sometimes feel like they're experiencing even more bias. And that can be direct, it can be indirect. But women and all underrepresented people are also still overcoming a lot of adversity in their lives, even just to get here. And we know that from working with our first gen and low income students and our underrepresented students. But I think there's a long way for us to go in terms of higher education administration and really making accessibility, equity central to our work and progressing it and moving it forward. So if anybody would like, I have recommendations for higher education leaders that I can send to you. But what did I overcome to get here? What was the adversity I've been up against? I am obviously in a position of privilege as a white woman. And so I have not experienced some of the direct bias that I know many women of color experience, and even experience in higher ed. But the things I've overcome to get here are many. I won't list all of them, but just to start from early on in my life, I came from a single family home, a single parent home with just my mom after leaving my father. And there was alcoholism and abuse in my home from a very young age. And so that, for those of you who have that in your own family history, you can understand how it impacts you all the way through, and impacts, the way that you think about yourself and your own worth and who you are and who you're going to become. And so I truly believe that throughout this process, education has not only uplifted my career and the possibilities that I can have professionally, but has helped me to heal a lot of that, to work through that and to have the resources and cultivate the resilience to be able to overcome those kinds of things. And that goes on in my life, that story of, let's say, just the disadvantage that starts you out with continues through your life until you realize how to behave differently, right? Because we learn certain things in our family from that young age. And when there is abuse in your home and family dysfunction, that carries forward until you can recognize it, acknowledge it, and decide to be a different person. So that's, a sneak peek of the adversity that I've overcome. But just in the time that I was actually doing my doctoral work and my dissertation, I moved to California with, this sounds a little strange, but a different husband. I got divorced. I actually had my chair mentioned to me once in the beginning. She was like, "That's so great. You just got married, moved to California." And she was like, "So many people get divorced during this process." I was like, "Great." So I did get divorced, and then met my amazing husband, who I now am with, and he's with us here today with our crying child, if you can hear her in the background. So obviously my life today looks very different. I have a beautiful life, a beautiful family. I feel very lucky and very privileged every day. And, try not to take any of it for granted, because my story was very different not that long ago. So I guess I'll leave it at that for the moment, unless you have any follow-up questions, Doc. Other vulnerable things I can share publicly. But you're on mute.
I want to say how proud, first of all, that I know that all of us are of you. You are an incredible role model. And for this moment of her story, you make us also very proud. And what a role model you are to so many of us. And I hope that we will continue to learn from you, to hear your story, and to make sure that that narrative never goes away, because you only strengthen us by your own personal strength. And so I'm just so proud that you're a part of who we are, and that our roads and our paths did meet at this time. But I have another present for you, and that present is our speaker today. I wanted to make sure that you could share a stage with one of the most impressive people that I have met in my life. And I know she hates me for saying this, and so she'll call me later and get me. But Dr. Llande Ajose, I met when we were on the CSAC board. We were both commissioners for the Student Aid Commission. And I came on actually a year before she did. But Dr. Llande Ajose is a very special person. And so what I would say that Dr. Verrier, I am so glad that we are sharing space with Dr. Llande Ajose, and that I can have both of you centerpieced together. And so thank you so much for being here. Dr. Llande Ajose is a senior policy advisor for higher education for Governor Gavin Newsom. She's responsible for developing and shaping the governor's higher education policy agenda, which is focused on protecting college affordability, preserving college access, and increasing system efficiency in order to meet the state's need for a skilled and educated workforce. An ardent advocate for college affordability, in 2014, Dr. Ajose was appointed to the California Student Aid Commissioner by Governor Jerry Brown. She served as 2 years as the chair until she resigned her position to go to work for the governor. I will say that I will give you a little bit more information, but she's also a graduate of Occidental. She holds, has a graduate degree from UCLA and holds a PhD from MIT University. She also has an honorary doctorate. I start off by saying that Dr. Ajose is one of the finest people I've ever met. And I have to say that she truly is. When I first met her, the first thing that I said, Llande, you must be a president of a university somewhere someday. You must. And she decided not to follow that and decided she'll go help the governor. And now she works with many chancellors, many presidents throughout the state of California. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my friend, my colleague, Dr. Llande Ajose. Dr. Ajose, it's all yours.
Thank you, Doc. Oh my God, that's just too much, but thank you.
I knew you were going to get me.
I am going to get you. Wait till this call's over. I'm going to get you. But I wanted to just say thank you for the kind invitation. Dr. Verrier, congratulations. It is that day of getting that piece of paper and watching your name go from Ms. to Doctor is a powerful one. And I'm so just feeling, it's taken me right back there. And I feel, and also thank you for your words, just that enormous vulnerability. As you were speaking, I thought, oh my God, I didn't know it was going to be that kind of meeting. So now I have to like, now I have to, as the governor says, I have to meet the moment. So, so I thought I would just, spend a little bit of time sharing with you my own story, which bears some resemblance to those of Dr. Verrier's in many respects. And then, leave it open to just a conversation. I think as we think about Women's History Month, it's great. It's great history to understand that started in Santa Rosa. And I think as we think about the enormous resilience that it takes as women to make our way through institutions that aren't always designed with us in mind. It's really important to kind of mark time and to think about how do we need to restructure some of those institutions. And one of the things that I think we know maybe innately as women is that we restructure those institutions sometimes based on our personal experience, because our personal experience is oftentimes undervalued as we think about the structures that exist. So, so I'll share a little bit of my personal experience with you. And then happy to, share the stage with Dr. Verrier and have a discussion and perhaps even answer some questions. So I guess I'd start as Greg said, I had the enormous privilege of earning a doctoral degree. And when I was working on my doctorate and writing my dissertation, I had a professor who told me that ultimately every dissertation is a personal story. So when I think about my story, I think it's a personal story. It's a story that reveals a lot of truths. And I think of my story in many ways as being kind of a quintessentially California story as well. The story itself is this. I'm the daughter of immigrants. Both of my parents immigrated here in the 1960s to seek higher education, and they met as optimistic 20-year-olds. They were in Chicago. They had both been sent by their families from Nigeria to go to college. Unfortunately, their love story didn't really quite turn out as planned, and before long, I was the daughter of a single mother who had moved to California, who had bouts of public assistance, and as we tried to get on our feet, never was able to quite complete that dream of a four-year degree. While she didn't get the degree, she was bound and determined to ensure that her kids were on a strong academic path. And so she was willing to make all kinds of sacrifices really to do that. For years, I remember she slept on the couch and we each had our own bedrooms and our own beds because it was important for us to get good sleep so that we could study, so that we could be at the top of our game academically. Eventually, she became a respiratory therapist. She would always work at night because the night shift paid the most money. But that also meant leaving us at home by ourselves because she couldn't afford to work at night and to have a babysitter be there at night. So she would lock the door at 10 o'clock. I would go around the house and unplug all the plugs to make sure that there wasn't going to be an electrical fire. I would wake up in the morning. I would wake up my younger brother, who was 3 years younger than me. I'd stick him in the bathtub because I would have already taken a bath. Then I'd make a full breakfast. There's none of this cereal business. It was like something hot every morning. So it was oatmeal or cream of wheat or eggs and bacon before we got on the public bus to drop him off at school and then take myself to school because we went to different schools. Eventually, she became a respiratory therapist, as I said, and that was because she wanted to send us to Catholic schools. She wanted to send us to the best education possible. So we went to Catholic schools and eventually we went to private schools because she thought that they offered the best quality education. I'd also say parenthetically, she was a little suspicious of what it meant to be Black in America. And she was deeply worried about the kinds of discrimination that would occur for her children in public schools. And so she had this idea that somehow she'd be inoculating them from that kind of overt discrimination and racism by sending them to private schools. I think, her biggest sacrifice came when I was in 10th grade. She had taken a trip that year back to Nigeria to visit family. And while she was there, her passport and green card were stolen. Without her passport and green card, she couldn't return to the United States. And so here I was in 10th grade in the country by myself. And while she could have sent for me, she actually chose to allow me to stay here so I could continue on my academic journey and continue on the path that she was unable to complete. So I share that story with you, not only because it's a remarkable story even to me, and I lived it, but also because I think it paints a picture of kind of the improbability of my life after that. Young Black girls raised by mothers who have had bouts of public assistance aren't supposed to succeed. And ultimately, because I was in the country alone, I ended up in the foster care system before emancipating at the age of 18. And so, by all measures, objectively, college probably wasn't supposed to be in my future. Certainly, a four-year college wasn't likely. And certainly a four-year college as a full-time student and at an independent college at that, was not in the cards. And yet, when I think about it from the vantage point that I have now, me going to college is exactly what education calls us to do. It calls us to ensure that every single student has meaningful access to a quality post-secondary education. And we need to do that in a way that doesn't just, allow students to go, but that ensures that we don't reproduce the kind of historic wealth and historic inequity that's rooted in our history as Americans. What we need to do is ensure that people go to college so that we produce the kind of economic and social mobility that's rooted in our ideals as Americans. And so for me, the work that I do now for Governor Newsom is fundamentally about that. It's fundamentally about thinking about what are the structures that exist? How do those structures impede progress for some of our most vulnerable students? And what is it that we are willing to do as a system to really fundamentally shift our structures so that those vulnerable students get every possible opportunity to succeed? How do we scaffold our institutions designed around them? That proposition is what led me a year ago, as all of our higher education institutions were pivoting, right, to accommodate this deadly virus. Everyone was going online. I actually thought it was an unimaginable feat that higher education, which is often accused, and sometimes justifiably so, as being much more methodical and not really pivoting very quickly. Within 3 weeks, every college somehow was up and running online. And while everyone was busy with the triage of how do we manage the pandemic, how do we ensure students have sufficient devices, how do we make sure that everyone has adequate access, how do we do all of that? As everyone was about that business, I was talking to a colleague and we said, as devastating as this pandemic is, what we know about California, what we know about Californians is that we will survive and that we have an opportunity to actually make things better. There might be an opportunity or a silver lining in this moment to redefine how we understand the fundamental proposition of equity for students in higher education. And how can we use this moment to do that? And so what we did was we put together a task force. The task force was 20 people strong. It met starting in August of 2020 through February of this year. And we released that report about a month ago, and it's called the Recovery with Equity Report. And it looks at 11 recommendations for how we can fundamentally shift higher education to be equity driven with the student in mind, to really focus on a sense of belonging for students in our higher education system, to focus on how we better use technology to support and assist students in their academic journey, to focus on how we provide greater and much more seamless access to services so students don't have to prove over and over and over again that they are poor in order to access resources. It's focused on how we create more connection between the K-12 system and the higher education system so that we don't lose all of these students in that fundamental transition. And it's focused on how we can think about access as being much more streamlined so that all kids can apply to as many four-year institutions or enroll in the two-year institutions that they need without having to overcome so many obstacles that oftentimes get in their way and discourage them from taking that next step. So that's the report that we put out a month ago. So far, it's been, I think, well received. But it will fundamentally require change. It will require change on the part of the state. It will require change on the part of the CSU and the UC and the community college system. We're calling for things like, common course numbering at the community college level, so that if you take English 101, it is English 101 everywhere. And students don't have to try and figure out, well, gee, if I'm going to transfer, I need to make sure I have these courses here and I can't get them there. And so how do I, that's a barrier. It's a unnecessary barrier, because it's really our institutions that should be accommodating students, not students accommodating our institutions. So I say that because I say all of that, I guess, because my work, my purpose is very much informed by my personal experience. I am so clear about what higher education has meant to me, what it means in my life, how it has shifted my opportunities enormously. There's no doubt in my mind that I wouldn't be sitting, well, I'm not in my office, I'm sitting in my living room, but I wouldn't be sitting in this position were it not for the access to quality higher education, public and private. And I think it's enormously valuable what all of you do every day to support students. It is the number one thing that students remember when they leave. They may remember some of their coursework. Sometimes they'll have some skills. They remember the people who were kind to them. They remember the people who held their hand and helped them get through. They remember the people who helped them figure out, where's that extra amount going to come for financial aid? Where's this extra support going to come because I need a tutor? Oh my God, how am I going to eat? I'm about to be kicked out of my housing. What's going to happen to me? Those are the things that students remember when they leave. And that sense of belief in them at a moment that is so critical for them is what carries them through, is what encourages them and supports them for the rest of their life. It becomes a part of their DNA, right? And so I share that story because I really am just enormously grateful personally, on behalf of the governor, on behalf of the state, for the work that you all do every single day to support our students. It is essential. It's essential. And you don't get to be me without that kind of support. You don't get to be Dr. Verrier without that kind of support. You don't get to be a part of the circle of scholars, I guess, without that kind of support. And so I just want to say thank you to all of you so much for everything that you do.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ajose. Certainly inspirational words. I've known you now for 8 years and did not know your story. As many times as we went to dinner and all the things that we did, and we never got to the story. But thank you so very much for sharing that with us. And there are two people that I'd also like for you to meet while we're here. One is our wonderful president of our student body, not doctor yet, but she is applying to MIT, and it's Melissa Kadar. And so Melissa, I want to introduce you to Dr. Llande Ajose, and I'm going to try to get you all together on the phone call so we can talk MIT together. And so, exactly. And then the other person I'd like to introduce you to is our interim provost, Dr. Karen Moransky. I have to say I've worked with a lot of provosts in my days, but I've never had one quite like Dr. Moransky that calls things out as we've had negative issues regarding race on campus, as well as obviously throughout the country. And Dr. Moransky has always stepped up, and she doesn't just answer it. She actually is in front of it. And I tell her that all the time. This team, my student affairs team, has had a chance to hear her on multiple occasions. If she sees something and she calls it as white supremacy, she calls it white supremacy. I have not seen that in my 40 years in higher ed. And so I wanted to make sure that as a leader, she too is bold. Melissa Kadar put together, we have what's called the Seawolf Commitment. And under her direction and leadership, we had 4 wonderful commitments, but we lacked diversity, equity, and inclusion. And under her leadership this year, within 2 weeks ago, they just passed it where they now have added diversity, equity, and inclusion to our Seawolf Commitment under her leadership. And then, of course, with Dr. Moransky, she just simply has been another bold leader. And I think all three of you are just stepping up and stepping out, and you're pushing the envelope. And I know it makes people feel uncomfortable. Good. And so I'm excited for the three of you also to have an opportunity to say hi. I'm sure that maybe you and Dr. Moransky have had a chance, Llande, to be in the same circles, but I wanted to make sure that I at least said hi to you all, and you all had a chance to say hi to each other.
Thank you, Greg. I'm going to get you too.
I know you are. I figured you would.
Thank you. And I'm also going to come after you. Three people
you
coming
know,
today.
You're in
I
trouble
hope
now.
it's all
Three
to buy
women
me
in-
to buy me dinner. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So at this point, what it's an open discussion, and certainly, as you heard Dr. Ajose say, that certainly that anything that she and Dr. Verrier can answer. But what questions do you have for any of them, or for anybody who's here? What would you like to know? Okay, if I don't have any questions, I'll throw some questions out.
Well, I can actually add one thing.
Please do.
I always forget this, but just to end the cliffhanger, my mom did eventually make it back. So, so just so you know that, it did take her 10 years. So she had to immigrate all over again. She had to kind of refile for those papers and immigrate all over again. It did take her 10 years, but she did eventually make it back. So now she lives in Antioch, you know, as an old lady. So she's here though. So just like
what part of Nigeria? What part of Nigeria was your family from?
Lagos.
Lagos?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite books is Things Fall Apart, and Chinua Achebe, and I just absolutely love that particular book. And I know that there are so many more, but that was one of the books that I learned in terms of helping me to understand a little bit about better of who I was too. So what questions do you have for each other? Because Dr. Verrier, I know that you got something going on. You got one question.
Well, I was just inspired by the Recovery with Equity report. So I want to go through and read all of that. That's exciting. I'm like, I wish I had that 3 weeks ago because I could have added some into my dissertation, but that's okay. Always next.
Sorry.
Save it for the publication. Save it for the publication.
That's right.
Mel, do you have any questions? Oh, go ahead.
Well, I'd just love to know a little bit about your trajectory from position to position. Like, how have you been able to advance into the position that you have now? What were the opportunities that you sort of found and took advantage of? And where did you maybe get challenged along the way and had help? Or
yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, and it's so funny because, you know, without giving away my age, I'll just say that I'm past the half-century mark. And that makes me feels like twice as old as most people in my office. There are lots of young people who like to work for the governor. And so there are so many people in my office who are like, I'm almost 30. And I'm like, oh my God, you are killing me. But so I say that only because I feel like I've had a much longer trajectory than most. But I started, when I finished my dissertation, I went and actually was hired by the Irvine Foundation. Most of my work in my doctoral work was focused on urban poverty and public policy. And I really looked at urban labor markets as a way to try to, there were two kind of solutions to the poverty policy piece. It was either going to be education or employment and workforce. And so I did a whole bunch of stuff on labor markets for my dissertation. And I looked at, well, I won't say what I looked at, but I was hired then by the Irvine Foundation to run a portfolio that was focused on workforce development and labor market issues. I was there for a few years. And then I was like, maybe I should like go back to using this degree kind of for what it was intended for. So I went and worked for a major organization, a research organization called MDRC that does kind of gold standard research. And I was there for a little while and that was great, but I was traveling like crazy. And I ended up getting pregnant with my second my second pregnancy, and came to found out midway through that I was pregnant with twins. And I thought, there's no way that I can do this job where I'm traveling like crazy with 3 kids under the age of 4. Like, that's insane. That is insane. So, so while I was on maternity leave, I had a small consulting firm approach me and say, why don't you come work for us? And I was like, this isn't a good time. I'm delivering babies. I'm like not focused on the career. And they said, oh, we'll give you 3 months. And like 3 months to the day, they called and they said, what about now? So at the end of my maternity leave, I ended up going and working for this small firm in Berkeley. It was a woman-owned firm, which made me feel like there was going to be much more support for as a working parent to be able to do the kind of work that I wanted to do. And it was consulting to nonprofits and foundations, doing a lot of both program evaluation and strategy work. And I did that for 5 years and ended up, becoming the managing director and all kinds of stuff. But then I kind of like I always have this tension between like, I need to spend sufficient time at home and take care of my family. And I want to do big things in the world. And so I feel like my career has kind of toggled back and forth. And so after that experience where I started doing all of this travel, because I was one of the, people in the firm who was kind of bringing in a lot of revenue, I took a job working for a small nonprofit where they promised me that I could go spend half of my days working out of cafes with a laptop. That sounded really good because it meant that there was going to be some flexibility. And I worked for this small organization called California Competes. And California Competes was, a year and a half old. And I ended up staying there until I left to come and run the governor's office. We grew a little bit in size, a lot in terms of our voice in policy arenas. During that time, I was selected by Governor Brown, to serve on the Student Aid Commission. And then to my great surprise, Governor Newsom his people called me and said, we want you to come and be the higher education policy advisor. And I was like, who, me? And they were like, yeah. And I'm like, yeah, but I live in Oakland and that office is in Sacramento. And they were like, yeah, that's true. But I was just like, you know what? This is one of those times where I think I need to stretch a little bit on the career side. So it's been just really gratifying to be able to have this job and to be able to think about how do we set a course for higher education for the future. So I feel like I go back and forth, but that's basically been the trajectory.
Thank you for sharing that. My daughter joined us as you were talking about tension of being a mother.
I saw that.
She was crying.
Lots of babies. And I'm
came in. I just wanted to reflect that one of my participants shared that when you're thinking about motherhood and your career, you can't do everything. You can do everything, but you can't do it all at once.
That's right.
You have to pace yourself, make decisions, make choices along the way that are best for family or work, and sort of toggle back and forth as you were talking about.
That's exactly right. I mean, I remember when Obama was elected, I desperately wanted to go and work for the administration in Washington, D.C. And at that point, I had kids who were like 6 and 3. And I was like, yeah, no, that's not going to work. So that's why when this opportunity came along, I was like, oh, they're 15, 12, and 12. They can handle it. They actually can put a little, they can put some skin in the game too. And I find that I do, like I announced 2 weeks ago to my kids, I'm like, I think it's time that you all start cooking. So I happen to have a job just like you have school. So you each get to make 1 meal a week and I'll make the rest. And that cuts me out of making like 4 meals a week, which is great. And they only have to do one. And, I'm like, yeah, they're now 14, and 17. They can totally cook. Right. So, it's this back and forth around, and I'm like, and that now gives me more time to be able to do things in my career that I want to be able to do. So, yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions or commentary?
I just really appreciate
Yeah.
that, having a 12-year-old son who learned to make omelets out of necessity, I will admit, during the pandemic. I like to joke that it turns out if you benignly neglect your children for long enough, they will make lunch.
Right on. Or they'll just eat plain rice. I have kids who do that too. And I'm like, you know what? It's not going to kill them. They'll be fine.
They will figure it out. It builds resilience. We talk
All that
about
grit.
the backgrounds that we came from and our struggles. I feel like my kids have it pretty good. But I am interested to know about how your work and your work-life balance has changed now that you are in the governor's office, and what that looks like as compared to other positions you've been in.
Yeah, that's a good question. It changed pretty dramatically. What I actually did, and I am very grateful to my spouse for this, is I decided that I don't like driving all that much. And so I actually rented a room in Sacramento, and I arranged it so that on Monday mornings, I would take my kids to school, be mom for half an hour in the morning, and then I would drive to Sacramento. So I got to work late on Monday mornings, which isn't great, but it was what worked for me. And I stayed up there Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night. And then I would come home after the end of my day on Thursday, which oftentimes was later than 6. So I wouldn't get home till 8, right? Every once in a while, I would try to slip out early if the kids had a basketball game or something like that I would try to catch. And then I worked from home on Fridays. So Friday mornings, I'd get up, I'd take them to school, I'd work as much as I could, I'd pick them up from school on Fridays, so that at least, I was showing up at school at the beginning and the end of the week and feeling like, I wasn't totally, totally abandoning my kids. But that's kind of how I handled it until the pandemic. I've been home. I spent one night in Sacramento, I think, since the pandemic. It was in September. And in some ways it feels harder, honestly, because the advantage of being able to leave is like I would work 12, 13, 14-hour days on those days that I was in Sacramento. And then I'd come home and I could have a 6 or 7-hour day on Friday. And that was fine because I had done my 40 hours by Thursday morning, right? So, and I really, actually, the other thing I really try not to do is I don't really work much on weekends at all, unless there's like an emergency, like that I have to, but I am not one to catch up on the weekends or check email on the weekends. And so people are like, Monday morning, they'll be like, did you get my email on Saturday? I'm like, yeah, I haven't gone through emails yet. Like, I actually put those kinds of boundaries. And I think it's important, not just for me and being as present as I can be at home, but it's also important in terms of what you model for other people. And I have young women who work with me, and they're kind of curious, like, how do you do this? And I don't think the way to show them to do it is that you're working, burning it at both ends all the time. Now, if the governor needs something and it's Friday night and he needs it Saturday morning, am I going to work? Of course I am. Or if something comes up, am I going to do it? Of course I will. But I don't make it a matter of practice to just catch up on the weekends. That's out. The weekends is for me to like exercise and grocery shop and get a pedicure with my son and, do all the kinds of stuff that we like to do. So that's for me, how I manage it.
Any other questions? Dr. Moransky, I saw that you had your hand up. I didn't know whether or not you wanted to.
My question was more a kind of moving forward question, coming out of the pandemic question. The mission of the CSU, I think, has never been more important than it is as we come out of the pandemic and as we repopulate our campus in the fall, and as we make sure that the pandemic it had as little impact on our students' ability to graduate in a timely way and to move forward with successfully through their college career as possible. I wonder, coming out of the Recovery with Equity work that you've done, if you have advice for a campus like Sonoma State that about where to put our focus, where to focus first on student issues that are going to help really help students who are seniors coming into higher education, how we help those students get onto a track that seems more normal or more, but also more effective than we had before the pandemic. So I'm just looking for thoughts about priorities to help those students as they come into higher ed.
No, I appreciate that. I guess there are a bunch of things I would say. One is I would say start by asking your students, because they are the experts oftentimes on what they need the most. What I have been hearing from students is basic needs is significant, and really what we can do from the positions of authority that we sit in to help support them in their basic needs. That is housing, obviously, that is food, oftentimes that is transportation. What it also is that we are not, and our report actually highlights this, is being super diligent now about digital equity, right? Which means that students have to have devices, they have to have the right devices for the kind of work that, you're not talking about giving college students a Chromebook. So they need the right devices, they need internet service, and they need sufficient bandwidth.
Mm-hmm.
I do not think that our next iteration of higher education as we know it means going back to face-to-face 100% the way in which we were before, nor do I believe that it means being virtual 100% either, right? It's going to be some blend. It's going to be something that takes the best of both of those experiences, because we know that there can be good quality, high quality teaching and learning in both, and there can be terrible teaching and learning in both circumstances. And so we're going to end up, I think, finding the happy medium, but it means that we need to be diligent about basic needs as being inclusive of digital equity, so that our students are appropriately prepared to be able to be educated no matter where they are. Our financial aid packages need to make sure that students now have access, resources for a device. We should be giving students resources for their internet service. Those are the kinds of things that are very practical that I think that we need to be attended to. So that's that. I would also say that beyond basic needs, in my sense is that students are really eager to have a sense of belonging on their campus. And sometimes that happens naturally, and sometimes it does not. Given the share of students that we have in our population, a lot of that means diversifying our faculty. So students see in their faculty people who look like themselves, people who understand their experiences, people who can think about how to incorporate in a rigorous way those experiences into the curriculum, so that students see themselves not just another face on campus, but they see themselves in the history, in the work, right, that is being covered in the curriculum. That confers a sense of belonging. So we need to work on making sure that students have a sense of belonging on their campus, because I think it is that sense of belonging. And that's why, for me, this issue around how students access services is so critical, because I think that it sets up this dynamic very early on where you feel like you don't belong, because you have to keep going to ask people for stuff that clearly somebody has, but you don't, right? And I think that that is a really alienating experience, and it does not confer a sense of belonging. So I feel like, I'm trying to figure out, without violating FERPA laws and all kinds of privacy laws, why can't we, if we know students are on free and reduced lunch in 12th grade, why can't we share that information with the school that they are going to, so that they are automatically enrolled in CalFresh? Why do we make them have to wait till they get to the campus and then figure out where they were enrolling CalFresh and how they enroll in CalFresh and feel embarrassed about it? Why do we do that to our students? We have not been disciplined enough about really putting ourselves in their shoes or listening to their experiences and their stories to figure out how we modify our systems to accommodate their needs. And that is our work. So that's the stuff I'm working on right now. I'm like, can't we take, the tax form, the 540 tax form that we have, and put a checkbox on there that says, estimate whether or not I can get a Cal Grant, so that any parent can do that each year that they're applying for that they are filing their tax form. So if I have a ninth grader, as I do, I have 2 ninth graders, I could do that this year and figure out, am I likely to get a Cal Grant for my 2 kids, or what do I need to start saving? Like, why can't we do that? I don't understand why we can't do that. So I guess I'm naive in that respect. So those are the kinds of things that I am really interested in, is those kinds of systemic reforms that can vastly change how people understand access, vastly change how people feel a sense of belonging, and materially change their ability to attend college.
Thank you.
Dr. Ajose, I have to say that that same energy that you're showing Sonoma State right now is the same energy that you helped to lead as the chair of CSAC. And we had a wild group with Harry LeGrand and myself, Jamila. I mean, we were some loud and outspoken people, but your leadership has been amazing. I'm so happy that you're in the governor's office, because they've got somebody for real in there. You have the intellect that you bring every day. You have the social cachet, understanding how it works and how it means and what it means to live in Oakland. And you understand the students, and you are a warrior mom, because you don't just have 3 kids, you have twins and another one. And you did that while going to school. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for sharing your time, your expertise, and your life history. Thank you, Dr. Verrier, for sharing your time with us, and so proud of you of being part of the Circle of Scholars. President Kadar, thank you for also joining us today, as well as thank you to Provost Moransky for being with us. This has really been a wonderful occasion. I wish we didn't just have an hour, but it's so good to have all of you. And Dr. Ajose, we will have you back again. But on something that you don't necessarily have to be the center and have to give up all of your personal stories. But we just love having you with us, and thank you for sharing. You all, thank you for our 18th. And Rachel, as always, thank you for bringing it. And hopefully by the end of the semester, we'll be at Fireside number 20. So you all, thank you. Have a blessed evening. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Thank you, Llande.
Go Warriors.
Go.
Go Warriors.
Touche.
Go Lakers.
I know they played
Warriors.
last night.
Lakers.
The Lakers. Dubs all day.
Go LeBron. Okay.
No.
I'm done.